Today, I want to talk about that one vibe that fights to control us all the time, and that's fear. All of us have experienced fear in some form of another. It has kept us from trying new things, it has hurt our friendships, it has created a script in our head that convinces us things about ourselves that just aren't true. The crazy thing about fear is that our ability to experience it is actually something that makes us human. We are where we are today because the human race has been able to accumulate knowledge, build on that knowledge, and then project it into the future. The same ability that allows us to fear allows us to imagine, have hope, and dream, which are great things, right? So our ability to gather information and think about the future has two sides. It has the fear side and the hope side. And I think we would all agree that the hope side is pretty awesome. We love imagining, dreaming, and inventing, but then we have the fear side, the side that comes up with all the what ifs. And we all know that the what ifs makes us feel a little bit crazy. So think about the last thing you were afraid about. How much of your day was spent thinking and stressing over it? If you're anything like me, it's most of your day. You're thinking about it, working through scenarios, planning out what to do or what to say. That's what happens when the fear vibe takes over. Our world gets really small. Our world becomes the fear. But here's some good news. Jesus had a lot to say about fear. The problem is we tend to read the verses where he talks about fear by themselves. For example, Jesus said, "Fear not." In other words, when it comes to fear, just stop and quit. Not exactly helpful, right? So today I want to look at a passage where Jesus talks to some of his close friends about fear, but I want to do it with a little more context. Jesus had 12 main people who would follow him around and learn from him. He was their teacher, and they were his disciples. They also happened to be his close friends. And in Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, he tells them this: "I'm going to send you out like sheep among wolves." Think about it. Wolves are predators and sheep are prey. So Jesus is like, you guys are the prey, and I'm going to let you loose with a bunch of predators. The ones that you'd usually run away from, I'm going to let you loose with them. And then he gets more literal. He tells them that they will also be arrested and beaten. And to wrap it all up, he tells them not to be afraid. It sounds easy, right? But when you look at it in context, this is just a part of a bigger story. Jesus took his friends on a field trip before this conversation, and that's where it all connects. You see, Jesus and his disciples, they were in a boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. And while they were there, Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples, in chapter 8, verse 24, said this happened. "Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. Jesus and his disciples are on a small boat in the middle of the water, and without warning, a storm shows up. And what is Jesus doing in the middle of this crazy storm? Sleeping. Can you imagine? The disciples were scared out of their minds. Quite frankly, they were worried about their lives, and their fearless leader was sleeping right through the storm. So naturally, they wake him up. Casually, they head over to Jesus and say, "Save us, we're going to drown." The disciples, they're frustrated, they feel alone, and most of all, they're scared, and they want their leader to calm them down, and he's sleeping. Jesus said this. He says, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" And I can only imagine the disciples' response when he asks this. He was teaching them about fear, so he gets up, but he doesn't panic, which is used to kind of make a point. No matter how scary the circumstances are, Jesus stays calm. Then Matthew says that Jesus spoke to the wind and the waves, and they calmed down. The disciples were amazed. They responded by saying this: "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." In a moment, their confidence in Jesus overwhelmed their fear of the storm. And that's the point of the field trip Jesus took them on, to show them that there's someone bigger and more capable than whatever they're afraid of. Now, let's get back to the conversation where Jesus says that he's going to send them out like sheep among wolves. Jesus follows that up by saying this: do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill your soul. In other words, if you're going to fear something, might as well make sure it's the right thing. It's like he was saying, hey, remember that boat ride? You were afraid of the wrong thing. Sure, you had a right to be afraid, but did you know that there was someone with you who was more powerful than a storm? Jesus goes on, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Jesus is saying, God is paying attention to you. Don't be afraid. You're worth more than the sparrows. Don't be afraid. God has numbered the hairs on your head. Don't be afraid. When it comes to dealing with fear, this is a big deal because God knows all about it and is with you in the middle of it. But Jesus isn't done teaching them about fear. They go on another field trip. Jesus tells the disciples to get in another boat. Except, plot twist, Jesus doesn't get in with them. He tells them that he'll meet them on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. At some point in the night, the same thing happens. The waves get bigger and the wind blows. Then they look out on the water and can't believe what they see. It's Jesus walking on water. Matthew records that the disciples were terrified, but then Jesus says something that gets their attention because they'd heard it before. Jesus says, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." This is Jesus trying to remind them of all the lessons and field trips that they've had up to this point. In fact, fear even controlled them after this field trip, though. And they remained fearful to the very end of Jesus' life. When Jesus died, they were more fearful than ever. See, for the disciples who loved and followed Jesus, when Jesus was raised from the dead, it wasn't just a nice surprise. It was everything. Their world was crazy, but because he rose from the dead, the disciples and anyone who followed Jesus could put their fear in its place. Now, Jesus' words made sense to them. "Fear not, I am with you," took on a whole new meaning. We know this is true because after the resurrection, the disciples came out of hiding. Not because there was nothing to be afraid of, but because God was clearly bigger than their biggest fears. The thing is, we all know that fear will always be a part of our experience. Fear is part of what makes us human, but we don't have to live like fear's in charge of us and telling us what to do. There's a guy named Peter who was one of Jesus' closest friends. He was one of the disciples on that boat, and fear no longer controlled Peter. So he gave some tips about fear in a letter that he writes to Christians who never had the chance to even meet Jesus. Peter says this: "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. When Peter says cast, he means throw, hurl, or heave. When you feel anxiety, fear, or worry, just take it and yeet it to Jesus. Because of Jesus, fear doesn't have to be the boss of you. So here's what I want you to do. When fear becomes the vibe that takes over your life, and when fear starts to control how you act, I want you to do this. First, name your fear. Put words around it, and then write it down. If you like to write on paper, pull out your journal or notebook and write it down. If you're more of a notes person or you're on your phone, just like type it out. But write something along the lines of, name it. So, I'm afraid of this, or I'm afraid if that happens, then this will happen. And put it in words in front of you, what has caused you to be so afraid. And then after that, throw your fear to Jesus. Yeet it to him. You could say something along the lines of, "Jesus, I am giving you my fear of this. I am afraid of all that stuff I wrote before, but those our what if situations. Here's what's true. You care for me. And even though it doesn't always feel like it, I'm choosing to believe that you're bigger than my fear or any fear I face. Since you defeated death, you can handle my fear. I give it all to you. Please replace my fear with confidence in you. I trust you. Finally, talk to someone. A youth leader, your parents, grandparents, or a trusted friend. They want to pray alongside you for your confidence in Jesus to be larger than whatever you're afraid of. When you invite them into your fear, you are inviting in another person who can remind you whenever you get afraid again of what's true. So as we wrap up today, I hope you'll remember that these vibes, feelings, and emotions that we have don't have to control us, especially fear. So while we can learn from our emotions, we need to know that because of Jesus, they don't have to be the boss of us. Let's be bold and courageous enough to share the fears that we face. Together we can help each other. Fear not.